The Rend Barbarian build is easily top 3, one of the best barbarian builds in all of Diablo. Like, here's it absolutely destroying Sething Abomination, and I just wish I had Whirlwind here, but I mean, here it is, just absolutely dominating, and I'm going to show you how to absolutely dominate just like this in your game. Starting off with basic skills, you want to go with Lunging Strike. You can look at those modifiers, but once you get a little bit higher level, like maybe level 70, you can put it down to level 1 out of 5, rank 1 out of 5, but for now, at level 60, you're going to want to put it at 5 out of 5. And now Rend, the main thing, 1200 bleeding damage over 5 seconds. And then you're going to want vulnerable, extends the duration of vulnerable. And then you're going to want increased damage to vulnerable enemies, because this is really, really big, because you can, because of this, which deals 30% chance to make vulnerable enemies, and then you can do so much more damage, and you'll be making tons and tons of vulnerable enemies. So this is huge. So you really want to put 3 out of 3 in that. And then going to Rallying Cry, increase your movement speed by 30% and resource generation by 44%. And then you get Unstoppable, all active, like it says here, at Enhanced Rallying Cry. And you get 20 Fury and an additional 20% resource generation. So you get 60% increased resource generation by just pressing that one button. And then moving on to Challenging Shout, you're going to want this because you can get damage reduction plus 20% bonus maximum life and as enhanced. And then you're going to want to go with this because 3 Fury each time you take damage, so you can continuously press that button. And then gain 15% additional maximum life because you're super tanky and you're a barbarian, and damage reduction against elites is increased against 9%, which you'll just take. And then moving on to War Cry, you increase your damage dealt by 15%, which is very, very big because you want to do as much damage as possible. And then the modifiers, you gain Berserking for 4 seconds, so it's just 40% increased damage right there with Enhanced War Cry. And then with this, it can be additional 10% if there's 6 enemies nearby when you cast it. Then you want to do this one 3 out of 3, so you can increase your shout skills durations. And then you want to go with this, not because of it, but because of this, so you can put this at 3 out of 3, so you can increase your Fury generation by 18%. And then Pit Fighter, you deal 9% increased damage to close enemies and gain 6% damage reduction. And then we're not doing any weapon mastery skills. Call of the Ancients does a ton of damage. It also gives you 10% increased damage and 20% attack speed, but this is very important. Corlick gains you 10% or 10 Fury each time Corlick damages an enemy, which is huge, so you can continuously press the Rend button and do tons and tons of damage to bosses, tons and tons of bleeding damage. And then you're going to want to go with the critical strike damage while using two-handed weapons because you're using them a lot. And then you're going to want to go with Unbridled Rage finally because, I mean, just a beautiful 135% increased damage. But you don't want to do this until about level 60. And now we're going to move on to gear, starting off with the helm. Direct damage against bleeding enemies has a 23% chance to stun them. This is very big against like bosses. I'm not sure if it works on bosses. You should test that out. And then this, I'm trying to get a better one for Rend. This, whenever you deal direct damage while berserking, inflict 20% additional bleeding damage. So just more bleeding damage. And then these are just very, very tanky pants for a barbarian, which you just want tanky pants for a barbarian because they're a tanky barbarian. And then moving on to the boots, you can just stun tons and tons of enemies by just walking into a group. and 20 seconds is actually not a very long time. And then this is a pretty good sword with the 58% basic skill damage. The imprinted lucky hit is still terrible for Rend, but this 1500 thorns while berserking, so you can gain tons and tons of thorns while berserking, and then enemies just basically just die when they hit you, just like that. Moving on to the next sword, you have 10% increased critical strike chance against injured enemies. While you are healthy, you have 10%, 20% more crowd control duration. And then you get the critical strike damage as well. And then this, you can do way more basic skill damages with 48% attack speed, plus a ton of vulnerable damage and a ton of damage over time, which is bleeding damage. And then 23% damage to bleeding enemies, which is always. And then Whirlwind's critical strike chance, I'm still looking for a better one for Rend, but 200 maximum life is very good because you want to be tanky. And then this, if it hits 5 or more enemies, then 40% of the resource cost is refunded, just like that. And then also 220 armor. And then you can basically just get tons and tons of armor from this, up to 45%, because you're constantly hitting enemies, plus the stats. And then the final thing is the expertise. Two-handed axe you want in your technique, increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and then increased critical strike chance against vulnerable enemies, which everybody's vulnerable, like always. So you want that in your technique. So then just more damage to vulnerable enemies. So that you want that in your technique. And now the two-handed sword, just way more bleeding damage and damage against bleeding enemies. And just more bleeding damage. I mean, just all of Rend is bleeding damage. Just 100% bleeding damage. And then that'll be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed, and please like and subscribe because it makes my day. And I've been stuck at 30 forever, so.